All right, today I'm going to show you how to make a promise to be lazy. It'll make more sense in a moment. So here I have an example function called sleep that takes a time in milliseconds and a value, and it returns a promise that will call a set timeout for the number of milliseconds that we want to wait, and then it will resolve that promise with the passed-in value. So it works like this. We can await the sleep function, give it 500 milliseconds to wait, and then return hello. And nothing too special about that. So that probably behaves more or less as you would expect, but it gets a little weird if we wanted to store the returned function in a variable to reference later on. So here I'm assigning a variable called nap to the returned promise from the sleep function. So I would imagine that once I await this nap variable, it should wait 1 second before resolving. But in fact, it resolved almost immediately. So to explain what's going on there is anytime that you create a promise, it's going to instantiate whatever asynchronous functionality it's related to. So in our example, the moment we defined the nap variable, the promise was created and that set timeout triggered, which means as we were typing the await nap line, that 1000 milliseconds had already passed, so the promise had resolved. In some cases, this is a good thing, but in other cases, it could lead to unnecessary resource use. And you may want something that is more of a lazy evaluation of a promise. So I'm going to show you how to build just that. So before I get too far, I want to show you this kind of interesting thing about JavaScript is we can create a variable that's an object that just has a property called then, which is a method. And we can actually await that object like any other promise, which to me is kind of weird, but also kind of cool because it allows us to create different objects that look like promises, but kind of aren't. Take, for example, this lazy promise class, which extends the built-in promise class. The constructor just kind of makes sure that it behaves similar to a promise, but the interesting part is the then method. It basically overrides the functionality of the built-in promise to only create that promise when the then method is called. So when you explicitly call the then method, or if you use the await keyword. So now if we look at the original sleep function and we replace the promise with a lazy promise, let's see how this works. Once again, if we assign this nap variable, then we take our time to type out the await nap line, and then we execute it. We see that this time it didn't resolve immediately. It did wait that 1000 milliseconds as you would expect. And of course, this is a trivial example that probably isn't going to be found anywhere in production code, but there are many projects in production code that are using a lazily evaluated promise system. One of the most common examples is with database ORMs or query builders. Consider this pseudocode. It's sort of inspired by some common query builders. There's a database query that goes to the user table and selects the 10 users and grabs their name. Now in theory, this would work fine with a regular promise. However, one thing that's common is to modify the query based on certain conditions. If that database query was a promise that eagerly instantiated, then we wouldn't be able to modify those queries the way we see here. But thanks to lazy evaluation, we can write code like this that's easy to follow along and modify, and only execute the query when we need it, when we actually await it. So that's just one example where lazy evaluation is helpful. It might also be useful for things like creating a bunch of fetch requests that only get instantiated when you actually need them. And that way you can create some, and if you don't need them, you don't waste resources. So the next time someone asks you to make a promise, consider being lazy about it. And if you want to be lazy by having robots tell you when the next video comes out, then go ahead and subscribe to the channel. I'd also appreciate if you hit that like button and would love to hear from you in the comments below. All right, I'll catch you next time.